Ben's budget. Ben scanned the spreadsheet, his jaw clenching as he noticed Jane's recent coffee shop charge, $5.43. His shoulders tensed as he moved it from essentials to extras, a place for everything. His index finger traced the growing emergency fund, 8 months of expenses now. Not quite the 12 months that would let him breathe easier. He rolled his neck, trying to release the familiar tightness.
Hey.
Jane appeared in the doorway of their home office.
Luke and Lucy invited us to that cabin by the lake this weekend. Fall colors are perfect right now.
Ben's shoulders immediately stiffened.
What's the cost?
About $180 for our share. Food included.
Jane's voice remained neutral. They'd had this conversation before. Ben's eyes drifted to the water heater replacement fund on his spreadsheet. Still $400 short of the target. He felt his chest tighten.
Maybe next time,
he said.
And we should probably focus on the water heater this month.
Jane nodded.
It's fine. Just thought it could be nice.
As she walked away, Ben felt the familiar knot between his shoulder blades get worse. It wasn't really about the $180. He could have made the numbers work. It was something he couldn't quite name, a feeling that had taken root 6 years earlier. He minimized the spreadsheet, revealing his desktop background, a photo from their wedding day outside City Hall. They'd kept it simple then, too, just close family. He'd been laid off 2 months before, after the tech startup collapsing without warning. The memory of those 6 jobless months still lingered in his muscles, the way he'd sit up suddenly at 3 a.m., calculating remaining funds. When he'd finally landed a position in healthcare administration, he'd promised himself, never again, never that vulnerable. 2 days later, Ben boarded a flight to Philadelphia for a healthcare conference. He'd planned his trip to include a visit to his cousin Rena, who lived in a small townhouse in the suburbs with her 2 children. His rental car crunched up the driveway just as Rena's front door burst open.
Uncle Ben!
7-year-old Pauline launched herself at him, her braids bouncing. Her younger brother Paul, barely 4, followed more cautiously. Ben stiffened momentarily at the unexpected contact before he could return the hug. Inside, Rena's home hummed with a particular kind of chaos. Books competing with toys for shelf space. Daffodils brightening the table in a repurposed pasta sauce jar.
Friday night is pizza night,
Rena explained, sliding a homemade pie into the oven. Ben noticed a stack of bills on the counter. His neck muscles tightened at the sight. He knew her situation, private school administrator with an okay salary, but as a single parent with 2 children, her expenses were considerably higher than his and Jane's.
How have you been?
The familiar instinct to assess made him glance at the bills again. He felt his pulse quicken as he noticed a past due stamp on one of them.
Busy, good.
Rena handed him a glass of water.
New curriculum rollout at school. Paul's starting preschool. Life keeps moving.
After dinner, Rena announced dance party time. She turned up the music, and the children immediately began bouncing around the living room, all limbs and laughter.
Come on, Uncle Ben.
Pauline grabbed his hands. Ben felt the stiffness in his arms as she tried to make him spin, his back and shoulders locked as if bracing against some invisible force. He managed a small shuffle, intensely aware of his awkward movements.
You're thinking too much,
Rena laughed, executing a twirl that made both children giggle. Her movements were fluid, her body relaxed.
It's not a performance.
Later, after the children were in bed, they sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea. The bills still sat in their stack next to Rena's laptop. Ben found his eyes repeatedly drawn to them, his fingers drumming a tight rhythm on the table.
So,
Ben began carefully.
How are things, really?
Rena raised an eyebrow.
You're looking at the bills. It's fine.
She rearranged the stack absently.
Things are tight sometimes, but we're okay. I've got systems. Everything important gets paid.
And the flowers? The takeout night I saw on your calendar?
The question slipped out before he could reconsider its tone. He realized his hands had clenched into fists and deliberately relaxed them. Rena studied him for a moment.
Those are important too.
She gestured toward the refrigerator, covered with children's artwork.
You remember when my dad lost his job? How my mom stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary?
Ben nodded. Their shared childhood memories diverged here. His uncle's factory closing had affected Rena's family directly. His aunt had implemented austerity measures that felt more like punishment than practicality.
I promised myself I'd never make my kids feel that way.
Rena continued. Her posture relaxed as she leaned back in her chair.
Like joy is something we can't afford.
She shrugged.
$5 flowers don't break us.
But you're behind on some bills.
Ben gestured to the dated stack. He felt his heart rate increasing just pointing them out.
Strategically behind?
Rena corrected, no tension visible in her face or shoulders.
The electric company can wait an extra week. Pauline's field trip, that can't.
Ben thought about his own careful allocations, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest. How different were they, really? Both systems, both priorities, just different ones.
You make everything feel like a celebration.
That's because it is.
Rena reached across to touch his hand briefly.
Listen, I watched you struggle after that layoff. I get it. Security matters. But at some point,
She paused.
well, I just hope you two are enjoying the life you're so carefully building.
The question lingered as Ben lay on the couch that night. His back ached from the built-up tension. When was the last time he'd agreed to something simply because it would bring joy, not because it was sensible or necessary? The next morning, the children insisted on making pancakes with chocolate chip faces. Flour dusted most surfaces. Rena didn't hover or correct their pouring technique, just guided gently when needed.
Perfect.
Rena declared when Paul presented his creation. Her face showed no concern for the mess covering the counters. Ben watched the children's delight in the simple breakfast. For once, he didn't reach for a wipe or a correction. He just watched, not realizing that his shoulders were lowered. When it was time to leave, Pauline handed him a drawing. Stick figures labeled Uncle Ben and Aunt Jane, surrounded by flowers. Rena walked him to the car and
Don't be a stranger.
she hugged him.
Life's short.
On the drive to the airport, Ben turned Rena's words over.
I hope you and Jane are enjoying the life you're so carefully building.
Were they? Jane had stopped asking a long time ago. Their evenings had fallen into predictable patterns, she reading or calling friends, he tracking accounts and planning for contingencies. He traced the spreadsheet columns again, but this time they felt more like walls than support. From the airport, he passed a small roadside farm stand. On any other day, he would have continued driving. But today, something made him pull over the car. The stand was simple, wooden tables beneath a faded awning, fresh produce arranged in baskets. The woman at the counter smiled as Ben browsed, his eyes landing on peach tarts and bunches of daffodils in water buckets. Ben's hand moved to his pocket, counting bills by touch. $11 total. Not on any budget line, not essential. His heartbeat quickened.
A tart, please.
He said, despite the tightness in his chest.
And a bunch of the flowers.
He sat on a bench overlooking the orchard, the tart still warm in his hand. For the first time in years, he wasn't assessing the value of his purchase. Just tasting. Just sitting in afternoon sunshine. He noticed with surprise that his shoulders had dropped. The daffodils lay beside him, bright yellow against weathered wood. Jane had mentioned once how they were her favorite, like spring bottled up. He'd bought them for her exactly once, early in their relationship. When he arrived home that evening, Jane was curled on the couch with a book. She looked up, eyebrows raised when she noticed the flowers in his hand.
What's the occasion?
She asked.
Just thought of you.
She buried her nose in the blooms, inhaling their scent.
They're lovely.
Ben watched as she arranged them in a vase, placing them at the center of their dining table. The bright yellow blooms added warmth to the carefully neutral space they'd created. The following week passed with Ben still managing their finances, still maintaining his spreadsheets, but something had shifted slightly. He paused when making decisions, questioning whether each no came from genuine need or simply habit. When his jaw clenched, He consciously relaxed it. On Tuesday evening, Jane mentioned the lake cabin.
Luke texted. They're going this weekend if we want to join.
She kept her tone casual.
Same deal as before.
The familiar tightness appeared in Ben's chest. The mental calculations started automatically. The water heater fund, the emergency savings. Yet alongside these thoughts came another awareness of Jane's expression, carefully neutral, of the daffodils still brightening their table, of how long it had been since they'd spent a weekend anywhere but here, in this careful life they'd constructed.
Yes,
The word felt strange in his mouth.
let's go.
Jane's eyebrows rose slightly.
Really? You sure?
Ben thought for a moment and then replied,
Yes, we will go.
Friday afternoon, as they packed overnight bags, Ben felt the flutter of anxiety, the old instinct warning him against unnecessary spending. His hand paused on the zipper, breath catching slightly. He noticed his jaw clenching and deliberately relaxed it.
You okay?
Jane asked, noticing his hesitation.
Fine.
He continued packing. His anxiety remained, familiar as an old scar, but now it stood as just one voice among others, not the only one he could hear.
Ready?
Jane asked from the doorway, her own bag in hand.
Ready?
Ben smiled as he reached for the keys, and for the first time in years, his shoulders felt light,